Howdy, I'm Jammer. So, here's the thing about having a library card. It gets you access to tons of free information. Now, I say free, and I'll get to that in just a second. But it's true. And not necessarily just information as well. If you take the library that I work at, we have DVDs, we have mobile hotspots that are available for checkout. We rent out Samsung Galaxy tablets. We have board games. We've got D&D books. We've got an entire YA section. Thousands of children's books, both in terms of chapter books, picture books, what have you. We have an entire nonfiction section, which covers a wide variety of topics. We have a mystery section, a Western section, an inspirational literature section, which is basically just Christian lit, which is more or less just smutty books about the Amish. True story. We have a science fiction section, and of course, we have a graphic novel section. Now again, this is a free resource. I said I would address it, and I will. Nothing in life is ever free. Somebody somewhere is having to pay for it. In the case of my hometown, property taxes go to the local city municipality, which then pays, helps fund the library, the police department, the fire department, pays for the roads, pays for water for purification, pays for the landfill, what have you. What does any of this have to do with comics? Well, one, being in a town with such a great library, they're able to afford a lot of graphic novels. And working in a library gives me plenty of times to, say, peruse the graphic novels on my lunch break or my coffee break or, well, 15-minute break. Or sometimes when I'm just roaming the shelves, helping patrons out, I'll make my way over to the comics and just sort of straighten them up. And while I'm there, I tend to discover 5, or in my case, probably somewhere around like 20 graphic novels I want to read. And since the graphic novel section has recently moved in my library, I've become much more aware of the manga that we have access to. Now again, pronunciation here is going to be a little difficult because, first off, it's a Japanese term, and even though a friend of mine was teaching me in Japanese, unfortunately COVID-19 kind of put the kibosh on all of that. Also, if it hasn't been made readily apparent, I might have a small speech impediment. Just saying. I'm also from East Texas, which means some of them fancy pants manga books ain't exactly what I immediately go towards. This is just to say, hope you appreciate that. If I mispronounce any words here, please, 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 please take all these factors into consideration. But back to the main point. What is this video about? Well, there's 4 books which have been sitting on the manga shelf in my local graphic novel section at my local public library, and I thought, you know what, I'm kind of interested. So I opened them up, I perused through them, and I immediately realized, oh, I know this guy. And the book in question was Blackjack Vol.1 by Osamu Tezuka. Now, manga fans are probably going to go, ooh, and some anime fans are probably going to go, ooh. And then they're going to stop and go, who says, ooh, like a doofus like that? Who are you? And I go, right, I wouldn't, I'd never do that. Anyway, Osamu Tezuka is a really, really, really important figure in terms of not just comics, period, but particularly in terms of Asian comics, aka manga. Osamu Tezuka has more or less been referred to on the back of this book as the god of manga, which that's kind of a bold statement from me. That's really more just the publisher trying to sell the book, but it's also, at the same time, maybe not that unfair. He probably is somebody a little bit more akin to somebody, say, like Will Eisner in terms of comics, and the fact that he did things that nobody had really done before, and after that, everybody borrowed from him. Fun fact, the kind of anime eyes that people are familiar with in a lot of Asian comics were largely pioneered by Osamu Tezuka. Now, again, you probably have not heard of this guy if you're like a Westerner like me, but at the same time, you've probably heard of his work. If you've ever heard of Astro Boy, or if you've ever seen those old cartoons, that was a creation of Tezuka. Another predominant book, which I would actually definitely recommend, I didn't pull it aside, so let me just, there we go, is a 6-part book series entitled Buddha. This is a book series which is kind of inspired about the life of Siddhartha, aka the original Buddha. This book is important because it really established Tezuka as such an important artist. And really, what I'm going to try to demonstrate today is that even if you've never read one of his books, you don't really need to know his reputation to appreciate his work as a comics artist. I'm also talking about this book today because, well, as you can clearly see from the barcode up here, I borrowed this from my public library, and it's kind of due tomorrow. So if I don't make this video tonight, I'm never going to get around to doing it again because life happens, and I've actually got a stack of books that I need to review. I look to my left. So let's talk a little bit about why this graphic novel is important and what exactly it contributes to the medium of comics. All right. Now, immediately I remembered that part of these video series is pointing out a couple pages to show what you can do with the medium of comics, but then also at the same time, these are some manner of book reviews. So Blackjack Volume 1 is the first, like I said, in about 4 volumes that I'm aware of. There may in fact be more, but Volume 1 is more or less a loose assortment of slightly interconnected stories that follow a surgeon by the name of Blackjack. He is a mysterious figure, he dresses mostly in black, he's covered in scars, and he's notorious for being ridiculously expensive, and more importantly, taking jobs that tend to be on the seedier side of things. That reputation is slowly established over the course of this book as we watch Blackjack take jobs from mobsters, from corrupt politicians, from serial killers, from all manner of, at times, pernicious individuals. In fact, the very first story is from a noted billionaire who's paying billions and billions of dollars to save the life of his son, who everybody acknowledges, and even the man himself, is pretty much good for nothing. Nevertheless, Blackjack does it. But what's later observed through each one of these stories in this collection is that while at first a great number of these people that Blackjack seems to be helping, they don't seem like they're terribly nice people. In the end, Blackjack manages to either reveal them for what they really are, in which case they are then ultimately undone by their own malevolence, or Blackjack manages to benefit somebody in some form or fashion. So it's kind of it's the old story structure of he seems bad on the outside, but actually he's got a heart of gold. But at the same time, he's also somebody who is really, really good at medicine and surgery, and he wants his money. So, essentially, what you're looking at in this first volume is a collection of short stories. Now, this is also, though, very much a collection of short stories in the veins of some comics, some whether Asian or Western, in the vein that you're telling a lot of small, seemingly independent stories, but you begin to sort of establish connections between the stories. A really good example of this, and I really should have pulled a copy of it aside, is Lone Wolf and Cub. That's an excellent manga series. I've definitely recommended it to you. I mean, if I'm talking about it, I assume that I'm recommending it to you. But the structure of this book is so much so that you don't have to have a lot of background knowledge of these characters, at least not with Volume 1. Because again, these stories are seemingly random. It's just a lot of different situations in which Blackjack comes forward in order to demonstrate his ability in medicine. Whether it's fixing up a supercomputer, helping a sushi chef who has lost both of his arms, whether it's helping out the man who taught him the very skill of medicine. These are weird, strange, and wonderful stories. And so what's really interesting is seeing how each one of them reacts to the other. Okay, knowing what the book is about then, we get to the really interesting part, which is what makes this book so visually spectacular. All right, you're back. So, manga is different than regular comics. Duh. No. Manga is different than regular, or particularly Western comics, and it's fundamentally brought back down to the idea of, this is where I would start if this was a Western comic book, page 1. But, as the book demonstrates, this is the wrong way. This is actually the last page of this book. So if you're this is your first manga, well, first off, congratulations. I hope you enjoyed it. But also, if this is your first manga, you're actually going to start off at what seems, from a Westerner's perspective, from the back. This has a lot to do with the culture that culminated this particular style of manga. Again, most Asian script is typically read right to left as opposed to left to right. That also gets into ideas of vertical script, which we're not going to get into here because this is more about comics than, a study of linguistics. Though that would actually be kind of cool. Anyway, first off, the structure of this book, it follows cultural guidelines, which means you're going to start off reading this book right to left. But that's also really important to the reader because if you've never read a manga before, it's going to impact the way you read the panels. Again, you are reading this book top to bottom, like you would in a normal comic book, but you're going to start off on the far right side of the page and then read left. And that's going to really, really determine the way you experience this comic book because at times, Tezuka's layouts are simply incredible. Looking at this page alone, there is so much happening in these 2 pages, and it's also a really good opportunity to observe the man's style. You observe, just in this panel alone, that we're dealing with kind of quasi-iconic work. And when I mean iconic, I'm talking about Scott McCloud's version of iconic, meaning that the details are really simple. This is not a photorealistic book at all. And in fact, if you look over to the next page, we see this gentleman here. And you can observe no human being would ever look like that. What's unique about Tezuka's artwork is that he sort of creates a world of wild, random, assorted body types. And if you look just a couple pages beforehand, you can get a pretty good idea of that. This is the billionaire in question I was mentioning a moment ago, whose son is in the hospital. But you also note this down here, and this doctor, his nose, his proportions, it's all ludicrous and ridiculous. These characters don't seem real. But by that same token, you do then eventually get to meet the character of Blackjack. And his outside exterior, apart from the scar, seems pretty traditional. So while on the surface there seems to be at first a kind of cartoony icon quality to this artwork, if you dig a little deeper, yes, there is the purpose and the function of iconic artwork, but it's not simply trying to be a cartoon. Tezuka manages to try to imbue a lot of the kind of foibles and eccentricities of humanity by making them from the outside so random and unique. And this is a style that continues in his other works as well. The first volume of Buddha that I showed you a second ago is loaded with characters who can be traditionally beautiful, traditionally attractive, or just wildly ridiculous cartoony. Now, there's also some issue, particularly later on in the story, where Blackjack is called to help fix a supercomputer, and I do need to bring this up. Tezuka died in the year 1989, same year I was born, and he was born, I believe, when I checked it a second ago, in the 1920s, which means he would have been exposed to particular types of media and particular world perspectives. To wit, we have a depiction of an African American. And obviously, it's not a good one. I'm not going to rush forward and justify and go, well, that's just the way they drew. No, that's true, but the reader's going to have to reconcile this fact. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm not even asking you to like it. I'm just letting you know it's there. And so if you're going to appreciate and analyze this work, you have to understand, or at least reconcile the fact that, one, there's not a lot of African Americans in Japan, and then two, he regularly relies upon that depiction. Now, that character is the only black person in this book, so it's not a sort of ever-present reality. Nevertheless, it's there. And there are depictions of human beings at times that seem almost subhuman or unreal. And so I would caution you again, when you're looking at this artwork, pay attention to the way he's employing icon in his humans versus a lot of times that almost photorealistic aspects of the reality around him. Looking at, say, the layout of the supercomputer hospital network, there is a tremendous, lush amount of detail. And that's one of the most beautiful things, and one of the reasons why I brought out my Taschen book, Atlas of Human Anatomy and Surgery. One of the most incredible things about this book, and I made sure, let me find the passage in question. Of course, I won't be able to find it now. Oh, yes. One of the most amazing and interesting parts about this book to me is that for all the sort of cartoony, iconic qualities to Tezuka's work, one of the joys and fascinations of Blackjack is the realistic portrayal of surgeries. Now, I should let you know, if surgeries and surgery artwork bothers you, this book might be a little triggering, but what's really important to observe is the careful attention to line work, to observe how the sutures would actually react when pulling back muscles, tendons, veins, nervous tissue. This is one panel of one small surgery sequence, and you can see how, from afar, you have, again, the kind of iconic sort of cartoon quality that then bleeds over into the sort of lush detail of surgery. And this is something that's ever present in the study of comics. Again, most of the time when you see these characters, they don't have, they don't have a photorealistic perspective. This arm and this leg is then further revealed to be contained of all of these muscles and tendons and tissues. I apologize for my light. I'm doing my very best not to let it flex out too much. But hopefully you can observe, again, this is a facet comics has relied on, and not just Asian comics as well. Western comics has employed this as well, where the comics artist will allow a general simplified meta perspective to occur on a regular level, but then sometimes hone in on a specific detail. Blackjack is incredible for its representation of surgery, but it's also really interesting to watch, or really to just observe how these surgery sequences further build the complexity of the body that's sort of ever present in this book. Now, along with that, it is important to observe that Tezuka's panel layouts can be really, really interesting. To wit, we have this page here where the supercomputer announces to everyone that he has taken, or it has taken over the hospital and it is sick and wants Blackjack to come and perform surgery on him. You don't need to know the details of what's going on this page, though. Really, all you have to do is just look at the shape of the panels. In a lot of graphic novels, or at least traditional graphic novels, that most people would probably pull off the stand, this would be a rectangular frame, then another rectangular frame, then a couple of small rectangles. But he does something really interesting here. Tezuka instead creates what seems at first to be a rectangle, and then he just sort of cuts it diagonally. And then he does another diagonal panel. And then, in order to sort of make it square, because we have a regular square and a rectangular panel down here, he does this bizarre three-panel structure where we get kind of a trapezoid and then two more trapezoids. This is not unique to this one page. Every single page of this book, Tezuka manages to play with the form, with panel layouts. And every single time he does that, it's because he's trying to present some matter of drama or energy. This page especially is one of my favorites because as these doctors are discussing this female surgeon who's like arguably one of the best surgeons in her hospital, but you know, she doesn't go out on dates, so that makes her snooty or something. Men, right? Anyway, what's interesting about this page is, again, the top and bottom. I did graduate from elementary school, I think. Anyway, the top and the bottom are regular panel structures, but then here in the middle, you don't have to actually observe what is taking place in these panels to just appreciate the fact that this is a really interesting layout. Now, again, We see her leaving the hospital, and the contents of these panels are all of her associates and all of her colleagues gossiping about how she's so kind of like snooty and calm and obsessed with her work, and my gosh, she really just needs to leave all this medicine nonsense aside to get a man. Again, what's taking place here is that he's allowing, or Tezuka's allowing, the kind of oddity of the panel design to kind of mimic the sort of mismatched, kind of jaded, cynical gossiping that is taking place behind this character's back. I hope that made you just go, whoa! Or maybe it just made you go, that's cool, whatever. Anyway, you can kind of observe just from that alone that this book is really unique, and Tezuka really is aware of the fact that comics is a form that, yes, you can do just squares and rectangles if you want to, but one of the interesting things about this medium is the fact that the way you arrange the panels on a page are just as much part of the effect on the reader as the content within the panels. Again, panels sometimes get forgotten because they're like, a lot of times, words. Words can assume a beauty in their form when arranged in the right sequence. That's what poetry is, effectively. And in terms of prose, there are many authors which have experimented with the arrangement of words in connection with the actual narrative itself to create a real aesthetic experience. Tezuka was one of the first Eastern artists to really understand what comics was doing with the panel. And probably, at least to my mind, one of the best demonstrations of this is a page near the end of the book. A local sushi chef has lost both of his arms in a hideous accident, and the truck driver who hit him and thus caused this to be decides, you know what, I will learn the trade of sushi, you can teach me, and I will help you sort of continue your work. The truck driver, spoiler alert, is not terribly good. And the sushi chef regularly just hounds him day and night, going, this is awful, this is terrible, this is nothing like what I would make, how are you not getting this? And this page right here is probably absolutely one of the best demonstrations, I would say, of Tezuka's craft, because you see on either side of this page panels of the truck driver trying his best and being yelled at by the chef and continually not getting it, so much so that right here in the middle, in this beautiful dramatic panel, you get this man just being clobbered with a giant roll of sushi. Like, I'm just geeking out at how gorgeous this page is. It's just, I'm a nerd, okay? I get it. But this is a really gorgeous attempt at using panel design and panel layout to build the dramatic tension and to build the narrative. Osamu Tezuka, in this book, gives his reader a real glimpse at what you can do with comics, not just in terms of what kind of stories you can tell, but visually how you can affect your reader. And that's what's really beautiful to me about this book, is over and over and over again, Tezuka manages to let the panels really be the strength of his work. But I also need to really bring something to the table, and that is action and line. Because again, these panel layouts are gorgeous, but just as equally important is Tezuka's attention to physical action. Again, this is the man who invented Astro Boy, a more or less quasi-superhero comic. Blackjack is not necessarily a superhero comic, but it is a very physical comic. There's frequent depictions of the bodies and surgeries and like wounds being excised, abscesses being drained. There's one story about a individual who more or less has a kind of conjoined twin that is severed irreparably from the body and then put into a robot body. That's where it gets kind of sci-fi-ish. But read the book. It's really interesting. And again, it's the physical actions that really come to play. And you can see just in this scene right here, immediately I go to Scott Pilgrim versus the Universe, and that's because that book was directly influenced by manga, by writers like Osamu Tezuka. So you can see immediately the long-term effect of this kind of work. You wouldn't have a lot of the really important fighting mangas without Tezuka. But what's really important about this one panel, and I'm really just going to use this one panel because I'm hitting about 15 minutes, and your patience is really, really, really appreciated right now, trust me. I know it's kind of hard to stare at me for half an hour. But if you look at just this sequence here, we've got a solid action sequence. There's movement, there's energy, and instead of just doing like a moment by moment of watching this fist move, Tezuka realizes we don't really need that. Again, using just a little bit of play with the form of the body, using a couple of lines, and then of course using onomatopoeia, in Japanese, we get the indication of physical action and physical activity. And maybe one more example is really demonstrates this, and this is in the opening pages of the book. Again, this man is driving a car, he undergoes a massive crash, and you can see just by the line work around him, we can feel the energy, we can see the movements we're being led through, and then finally just the blurry image of the car, and all of these lines contribute to a real sense of energy and just sort of dynamic affairs. Blackjack Volume 1 is an amazing book for the way it's constructed, because much like the rest of his work, Tezuka manages to really play with the form and use it to tell an interesting series of, again, individual stories, but stories that sort of begin to create an emotional structure and some manner of art that's sure to leave you really satisfied and interested. So, before I end this, it's something really important to point out is, again, we're dealing with an Eastern aesthetic, we're dealing with a Japanese creator, and a friend of mine at our local bi-weekly meeting of Graphic Novel Book Club pointed out, he asked, how many countries have dropped an atom bomb on another country? 1, the United States dropped a bomb on Japan. How many countries have had an atom bomb dropped on them by another country? 1 country, Japan, from the United States. We can't forget just the long-term emotional and psychological trauma that was the lingering effect of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And virtually every manga artist has at some point addressed that horror, that trauma, and tried to translate it into art. And probably one of the most beautiful examples in this book is the story of an artist who is on an island nearby attesting of one of the atomic bombs. He loses one of his arms, he's burned all over the skin, and he begs Blackjack, please, 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 fix me so that I can paint this picture to express the real torment and horror of that bomb. And the final panel, the artist finally achieves his greatest work and then immediately dies, as Blackjack knew he would. But you can just see in this one panel, just this glorious, gorgeous painting. And at the very end, people going like, too late, no, it wasn't too late. Again, I'm just going to keep holding it there because, one, while this immediately makes me think of all the Uzumaki and Junji Ito books that are literally to my right, and I haven't even started rereading them again so I can talk about them here, I really wanted to bring attention to this last page to show that Tezuka isn't just an artist telling a bunch of sort of random, kitschy stories. There's a lot of heart, soul, and depthful emotion going into every single page of this book. And along with the just gorgeous panel layouts and narrative structures, there are some images in Blackjack, Volume 1, that just stay with you and linger after you. And so if I had to offer sort of like a final summation of this book, Blackjack is very much an examination of the body and how it can betray us, how it can benefit us, its wonders, its mysteries, at times its grotesqueries. But at heart here, there seems to be this really interesting exploration of humanity through medicine. And so I really haven't read a lot of books like Blackjack, because most books about doctors use the medicine as simply a backdrop or a character fascination. But Tezuka really seems to explore something about the medical profession and how doctors can have a real role in their approach to medicine and the way it can change people's lives. And that to me is one of the most beautiful parts of this book and why it's most definitely worth your time. I think I'm going to end it right there. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. Whoever you are, wherever you are, you spent a half hour listening to me yammer on about comics. Just get a girlfriend, man. Jeez. Or lady, whoever you are. I don't care. Or get a boyfriend. Whatever you're into. Non-gender specific individual. Hey, you do you. Whatever the case, seriously, get somebody. Hang out. Get some shrimp. Shrimp is awesome. Bacon wrapped shrimp. I don't know what I'm talking about now. I'm going to move on. If you'd be interested in reading Blackjack, and not just me trying to be funny, definitely check out your local comic book shop. More and more comic book shops in the United States are carrying manga because there's a massive market for it. If your local comic book shop doesn't have it, ask them to order it for them. If they don't, you might check out a Barnes & Noble or a Half Price Books. So check out your local comic book shop first. It's my dog, Sonia. I'm almost done, sweetheart. If your local comic book shop doesn't have it and can't order it, check out your local public library, like I did, because they might have it or they might be able to get it to you through interlibrary loan. And again, if you haven't checked out Osamu Tezuka, this is an excellent book to start on because, again, it's a series of small, little independent stories that build towards a larger whole. You don't have to have 20, 30 books knowledge or anything. Just hop into this wonderful little book and check it out. Again, thank you so much for watching. Like, share, subscribe, all that jazz. It helps me know that you're watching this, that you like this, and you want to see more. Feel free to comment in the comment section below. Did you read this book? Did you like this book? Did you get it from a library? Tell me. Whatever. Talk to me. Or don't. Hey, I get it. This is a weird relationship. I'm not really sure what we're doing. I bought us tickets to go to Aspen over the weekend, though, so, definitely hit me back about that. And as always, go read some comics.